Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole. It's another one of our weekly congressional chats. This one's a little bit early. It's on a Wednesday instead of a Friday, partly because Congress is wrapping up its work and getting ready to take a break. And I will say this has been a surprisingly consequential and bipartisan week, something that I think most of the media has missed. Yesterday, we had two really important votes. One of them was a postal reform bill. This was an exceptionally bipartisan bill, one that both parties worked on hard. The post office is actually a constitutional responsibility of Congress to operate. And in a district like the one I'm privileged to represent, it's an extraordinarily important institution, particularly for the more rural parts of our district that might not have the services of some of the private package carriers. But everybody can count on service from the United States Post Office, even when it's not profitable for the post office to do that. In addition to that, and of course, many letter carriers and postal employees we have in the district, we have one of the largest postal training institutions in the country located in Norman. So the post office is a big deal in the 4th District of Oklahoma. I was very pleased to help to work to get this legislation through the Rules Committee and then to support it on the floor. And I'm frankly proud to see Congress focusing on something that's important. We have a Postmaster General who was actually a Trump appointee, got a lot of criticism from Democrats, Postmaster DeJoy, but has turned into a really spectacular performer in terms of modernizing the post office, saving us billions of dollars, and I think making smart business recommendations. The fact that so many Democrats supported a bill that he endorsed himself, I think is a testimony to how well he's done, even though a year ago he was actually under attack, as Democrats said he would somehow rig the mail so we wouldn't get mail-in ballots, something that of course never happened, or that he would fail spectacularly in the Christmas rush. Again, something that did not happen. So this bill was really bipartisanship at its best. I tip my hat to Chairwoman Maloney from New York, who heads up the Oversight Committee, and her ranking Republican member, Jamie Comer, who's a very good friend of mine. They work together, something we don't see a lot of in Washington, D.C. They produced a bill and it was passed with overwhelming support on both sides of the aisle. Majority of Republicans and almost every Democrat voting in favor. And again, I was very pleased to vote for the bill. The second item was extraordinarily important and was again very bipartisan, and that's the so-called continuing resolution. In other words, legislation that will keep the government from shutting down. Now, this keeps the spending levels exactly where they have been, with a few modest exceptions. And really, we simply extended the Trump budget another 4 or 5 weeks while negotiations on a new budget take place. But we did make some changes that I think were exceptionally important. Number one, we committed additional money to the completion of a Columbus attack submarine, something that otherwise would cost us a lot more money, and frankly something that we need right now in the Western Pacific. We provided additional money for Pearl Harbor, where we have a fuel storage and water problem where fuel storage leakage that hasn't been dealt with in decades literally has endangered the water supply that our own service members use at Pearl Harbor. We spent some additional money on cybersecurity, something I think was very, very wise. And finally, we provided the Pentagon with flexibility to redeploy American troops during the Ukraine crisis. That takes money. If you move troops from one place to another, you start moving equipment, you're trying to send a signal to your adversary, it's going to cost you. And we wanted to make sure the Pentagon had both the flexibility and the resources it needed at a critical time. So really, the bill in and of itself simply kept current spending at Trump level with these modest exceptions, all of which were for defense. I will say, though, the fact that Republicans delivered 51 votes for this effort was something Democrats noticed, and it's something very important if we're to get to a final deal on appropriations. almost every Republican appropriator, all but one actually, voted in favor of this bill. And that's to strengthen the hand of our representative at the negotiating table, Kay Granger, who's the ranking Republican member of the Appropriations Committee. I serve as her vice ranking member, and I'm very proud to do so. And Kay has held the line on spending. She's number one, pushed hard for additional defense spending, something we need. Has pushed hard to cut the domestic increases that House Democrats put in the bill. Has fought tirelessly to make sure that the Hyde pro-life protections go back in the appropriations bill, and has worked to remove a lot of the poison pills that the Democrats have put in, a lot of them related to climate change or labor union issues, things that honestly don't belong in appropriations bills. But the point was, while negotiations were underway, she needed to demonstrate that she could deliver votes, and that if the Democrats met our demands and worked with us, we could put votes up on the board. Because if they do those things, they're going to lose votes on their side of the aisle. People that frankly want to spend more domestically, people that want to cut defense spending, people that want to get rid of the Hyde protections for the unborn. So again, Republican appropriators, certainly me among them, felt it was very, very important that we give our negotiator at the table a sign that the Democrats could see that, hey, if we come to a deal with her, she can deliver the votes we need to get it across the line. So it was really a very important sort of inside moment in Congress. But again, a bipartisan moment, and I thought that was a good sign. I was particularly pleased to see the leader of the Republicans in the House, Kevin McCarthy, vote for both the Postal Reform bill and provide the support that Kay Granger needed in her negotiations with the Democrats. Negotiations that we all hope will lead us to a budget that will leave the United States better off in terms of defense, and will, again, reduce the Democratic excesses of spending domestically, and again, provide important protection for the unborn while sort of weeding the garden, if you will, and removing a lot of extraneous material from appropriations bills. So I regard this as being an absolutely positive week for Congress, and one that I think has set us up for potentially a bigger success going forward in terms of a bipartisan budget deal that will get us through the rest of the fiscal year. Let me also talk about one other matter that I know is on the minds of most Americans who keep track of international affairs, and that's the Ukraine situation. There, frankly, I think we've been reaping the sad consequences of the Biden failure on Afghanistan earlier this summer. The reality is our adversaries think we're weak. They watched us walk out of a 20-year commitment, leave a country in chaos, lose 13 Americans on the way out the door, and leave hundreds of Americans and thousands of American supporters behind as we race to exit Afghanistan. That's not lost on the Russians, that's not lost on the Chinese, that's not lost on the Iranians. And let me flag Iran for you just real quickly. We have an administration anxious to get back into the Iranian deal, which President Trump got us out of it. That will be a disaster. That's opening the door for a nuclear-armed Iran. Bad news for Israel, bad news for our friends in the Arab world, bad news for the United States of America. I think when I look at the Ukraine, and we try to be supportive of the president, again, the Congress gave him the resources he needed to redeploy American troops. Never forget that we're in this crisis because of some of the mistakes that were made earlier this year by this administration and some of the signals it sent out that led our adversaries to be more aggressive than they have been in many, many years. So again, we're going to continue to work on that to try and send the right messages to our enemies. We'll be supportive of the administration where we can. None of us know what Vladimir Putin will do. Will he launch the largest military operation in Europe since the Second World War? We don't know, but he's amassed the capability on the borders of the Ukraine to do that. Now, if that were to happen, there won't be American direct involvement. We're not sending troops to the Ukraine. They're not a NATO ally, but we are sending lots of weapons. And we will impose sanctions on the Russians, and we are trying to line up our allies to do the same things with, quite honestly, mixed results. But the aim is to send a message to the Russians that if they try to upset the structure and the stability of European peace, something that we've had for 75 years, courtesy of the United States of America, they're going to pay a heavy price. And it's vitally important, even when we disagree with the administration, as I do in so many areas, that in a situation like this, America speak with one voice, and that our adversaries understand there will be consequences to aggressive action. So we're trying to work on those things, and we'll see how that works out in the weeks and months ahead. But the good news may be that Congress is going to be out of session for a couple of weeks. And so the next time I speak to you, it'll probably be from the district. And with Congress out of session, sometimes America can catch a breather, so to speak, and relax a little bit and not worry about what's going on in Washington, D.C. With that, I look forward to visiting with you again in the not too distant future, and thanks for listening in.